Intentional color pooling has been taking the crochet world by storm lately, which is pretty exciting, but I have heard a lot from the knitters thinking, hey, what about us? Do we get to color pool too with this Argyle pattern? So I'm happy to tell you that color pooling in knitting is quite simple, and you can definitely color pool the Argyle pattern just like all of the crocheters. So I've started this swatch just so you can see exactly what it looks like. These two are coming to cross over one another and create that X that starts the Argyle shape. As you can see, this is the crochet version using the same yarn. So they're actually pretty similar, even though I don't have as big of a swatch worked up with the knit version. So I'm going to show you how to do this. It's quick and easy, and I think you'll love it just as much as the crocheters. To get started with knit color pooling, you need to figure out the sequence of your variegated yarn. So many of the same rules apply to knit as they do to crochet, and if you haven't yet checked out the Crochet Crowds tutorial or Glamour for You's tutorial, they have some really helpful information about picking out your yarn, and I recommend going and checking those out. So basically you want to have a variegated yarn that has at least 6 inches of each color and makes a pretty quick color transition. You can see mine fades a little bit, but you don't want it to be fading too much. So I've got a 5-color yarn here, and I'm going to start my sequence with the pink. The very first thing you need to do is go through and figure out your color sequence. So mine goes pink, green, gray, pink, cream. And then I'm back to my dark pink. And I'm ready to start, and I'm going to go ahead and start at the very beginning of a dark pink section. So in order to get started, the very first thing we're going to do is cast on. And what we want to do is cast on the number of stitches that gets us through 2 whole sequences of the color sequence. And this is actually double the amount that we're going to be using because the cast on takes more yarn than a plain knit or a plain purl stitch. So especially my crochet cast on, I want to make sure that I do double what I need. So even though I'm only going to be working up 1 sequence of colors on each row, I want to go ahead and cast on through 2 whole sequences. So I'm going to start with my dark pink and go all the way through my cream, and then I'm going to once again go through from my dark pink to my cream, and then I'll be done with my cast on. So I'm going to go ahead and get those on my needles. Okay, so I've now got all of my stitches cast onto my needles. You can see I started with the dark pink, I went through the cream, and then I went ahead and did that again since my cast on takes more yarn than my normal stitches. So once again, I went dark pink all the way through cream, and now I've got dark pink ready to be the first knit that I do on this first row. So in order to create a project that doesn't roll in on itself, you want to do a few rows of garter stitch. So you're going to start out by just knitting 3 to 5 rows. It's totally dependent on how many you want to do. In my swatch, I only knit about 3 rows, and it rolls in a little bit, so it would be helpful to have probably 5 rows of garter stitch there at the beginning. So we're just going to start out row 1 by simply knitting it just like we always would. Now the whole goal is to stop once we complete 1 sequence. So I know that my sequence ends on a cream. So I want to go ahead and knit all the way across and then stop knitting when I've completed the cream section, the first cream section. We're not doing 2 at this point, we're only doing 1. And I'm just going to go ahead and knit across so you can see we are not going to use all of the stitches on our needles. Okay, so I've made it across my row, and as you can see, the last stitches that I worked were cream. That's the very end of my sequence, and my working yarn is now red, and so I am ready, or dark pink, so I am ready to move on. And as you can see, I've also got these stitches on my left hand needle that are unworked. Don't worry about those stitches. What we're going to do is we're going to pull them off of our left hand needle, and you're just going to let them go. Later on, you can untie this knot, and then you can work it really carefully back up here and retie the knot so that these chains aren't actually there still. They'll be gone, and you'll have just your starting yarn tail like you always did. But this helps you get started without having to have a certain number of cast on stitches. So it's much easier. And this is actually something I learned from Glamour for You in the crochet version, and then I went ahead and applied it to the knit version. So once you've made it through your whole sequence, you're ready to go ahead and get started. And we need to, because the whole theory of color working or intentional color working in this Argyle pattern is that we offset each stitch by one color, basically. So every stitch, we're going to move it over to the left by one color. And so what we want to do is go ahead and remove this last stitch from our needles so that we've started that offsetting process. That's going to make the first stitch of our next row white, meaning that we'll be offset by one rather than starting right on the dark pink. So now we're ready to go ahead and turn our work and get started on the next row. So it doesn't matter if you're knitting the row, purling the row. Of course, I think that this pattern looks best in stockinette stitch, but you can also do it in garter stitch. So what you want to do is go ahead and make sure that you add those extra edging stitches on. What I did on my swatch was 5 stitches on the edge in garter stitch each time. And then, like I said, I did a few rows at the top and bottom in garter so that my swatch would lay flat and not curl in on itself so much. So I'm going to go ahead and just knit this whole row since I'm starting off in a garter. And I've already offset my stitches, so I don't need to worry about that. I can just go ahead and knit it. The goal at the end of this row should be that I am just making it through my color sequence with about 2 stitches left of cream so that we can offset the other side as well. So the first couple rows are the trickiest in your tension because if you get too loose, then you won't have enough yarn on the other side. And if you get too tight, then you'll have too much yarn. So you can expect that you might end up redoing these first couple of rows a couple times until you get them set. But once you have a good foundation, you're not going to have to redo too much. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and work across this row and show you what it should look like at the end of this row. When you make it to the end of row 2, you should have just a little bit left of your last color in the sequence, and then you should be ready to start with your new color again. So in order to tell if you're on track, you want to look at the previous stitches that you've made. Every other row, you're going to be moving all of your stitches over by one. So we're not looking at the stitches that are currently on our needles. We're actually looking at these stitches right here, the purl bump that I'm looking at, to see if we're lining up or not. So I can see that I have enough yarn left here that this is going to offset my project by 1 or 2 or possibly even 3 stitches. And that should be just fine as long as I remain consistent throughout. So you can offset by 1, you can offset by 2, you can offset by 3. It's just a matter of maintaining consistent throughout. So I've got a good set up there and I am ready to go ahead and get started on row 3. And I'm just going to also knit this row. Then I'm going to start working into stockinette stitch so I can show you what to look at. So I'm knitting these first few stitches. And it looks like it's actually offsetting by a little bit more than I'd probably want it to. So I could either go back and work that first row a little looser, or I could work these first few stitches a little looser so that my pink yarn doesn't go quite as far and it doesn't get offset quite as much by the time we make it across this row. So you can adjust your tension row by row and even stitch by stitch to make sure that it works up as it should. So you can see I've got those pinks layered on top of those pinks and then these ones layered over, and I'm shifting everything over to the left. And this is essentially exactly what you're going to be doing throughout your project. So I'm going to work up a couple more rows and then I'm going to show you when you get to a stockinette stitch part exactly what you need to look for. All right, I'm ready to start my stockinette stitch row, and I'm going to do that by doing 5 knit stitches on the outside to keep a garter stitch border so that things won't curl in. And then I'm going to go ahead and purl because I'm on the back side of my project so I can see that. And once again, we're just looking at these little ridges here underneath each stitch, not the actual loop on our needles, to make sure that everything lines up. So this is how it should look on a purl row. Just make sure that you do that garter stitch edging on either side. And you can see my pink is going just a little bit farther than my green. So I just worked a green stitch, that one there, with pink. So I can see that I've overlapped it quite a little bit. And I'm ready to keep going across my row. And on a knit stockinette stitch row, you're going to want to get past those first 5 stitches so that you can see the stockinette stitch section versus the garter stitch section. And then you're going to be looking at, you won't have the loop in front anymore, but you'll have this stitch right in front here. So you're looking at the little V right at the base of the loop on your needle. You're not looking at the loop itself, you're looking at this little V right here. And those are the ones that you want to make sure you're shifting over slightly. So I've got cream here, and that one right there is pink, and I'm going to make it cream now so I can see that it's shifting. That one's pink, making it cream, so I'm still shifting by a couple of stitches. So I know I'm still all lined up and good to go. And that's the basic theory. You just keep going until you have created that beautiful Argyle pattern. And it will take a little while. Make sure you check out the crochet crowd for good suggestions on yarn choices. And then also keep in mind that knitting takes more stitches in order to make this pattern in this Argyle pattern. So I'm using a sock weight yarn right now, and this would be about the right width for a scarf. So keep that in mind. You are either going to need to use less colors, or so that you have a smaller repeat sequence, or you're going to need to use a smaller weight yarn than the crocheters. All right, enjoy!